So in this worksheet for the skeletal system, we're just going to look at part 1, part 2 for the joint, the types of joints, part 3 for the skeleton. There is no part 4 right here for the bone shapes, part 5, and then part 6. So part 7 and 8 are, or just part 7 is too specific, too detailed for what we're trying to do. I would say the most important aspect out of this is understanding the periosteum, the covering, and I actually, let me pull up PowerPoint. I want to pull up a cool slide. I wanted to show this slide in this lecture, but it pops up in my KIN 231 flexibility. So I love this image because it kind of shows so we're familiar with this muscular structure here, right? We can see the bone, the tendon, and when this is presented, it's like bone is bone, tendon is tendon, muscle is muscle, like they're separate tissues. But if you look at the muscle structure here, we have the filaments, the contractile elements of the muscle, and then those are bundled in myofibrils. Those myofibrils are bundled as in the muscle fiber, right, the muscle cell, and then those fibers, these are like the strands of the hair, they're bundled together in these fascicles, and then that what makes up the bulk of the muscle. If we look at the tendon structure, we see that it has a very similar aspect where you have these collagen microfibrils, they're bundled together, and then you have this bundled like structure that goes all the way up to what we see as the tendon. So now this connective tissue is nothing more than these. So you have the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium, all this kind of fascial or connective tissue. That's what you're seeing here. So you can see now both of them superimposed. You can see the muscle fibers that are bundled in fascicules. All of those muscle fibers are wrapped in connective tissue, which you can kind of see right here. And then you can see that connective tissue becomes continuous with the tendon. And so you can see how the tendon and the muscle fibers are fully integrated. The same thing is true for the bone. So the bone has that periosteum covering, and this connective tissue, this epimysium, this fascial collagen-based connective tissue that is merely the wrapping of the muscle fibers that then becomes a tendon, that is continuous with the periosteum. So it doesn't just stop right here. This goes the entire length of the, oops, where are we at here? Did I close that? I didn't close it. Okay. That's continuous with this, and this periosteum runs the entire length of the bone. So the tendon doesn't just pull right here, it pulls on the entire fascial envelope of the bone. That's what's sometimes not appreciated with these anatomical drawings, that it just like, oh, here's bone, and that's just kind of stuck right there. This is integrated into the entire length of the bone, into that periosteum. So that's the most important aspect of the periosteum is this right here, is that it goes the entire length and it's just not at the tendinous attachment. And it shows how these fascial envelopes or these fascial relationships exist and are a source of intervention, and can be a source of dysfunction as well for individuals. Cool. Any questions on that? Perfect. All right.
Professor, I had another question.
Yeah.
Going back to either last lecture or the lecture before, or recording, we talked about cross bridge formations.
Yep.
Are there techniques or strategies you can use when you're training to increase the quality and quantity of those formations?
So if we look at like the yes, and it's based on your starting positions and your speed of contraction. Let's see, which word was that? Was that muscle? No. Let's see. Function. All right, so your question is on the quality and the quantity of the cross bridges. And when we look at the determinants, there's some things that we can change and some things we can't. So like the cross-sectional area, we can change with time. But the two things that we can change are in terms of the way that we lift the weight, in terms of our starting positions and end positions. So length tension relationship, or the range that you work through, and then also through this force velocity relationship, meaning how fast you do the contraction. So cross sectional area is just a byproduct. But when we look at the length tension relationship, we know that we're strongest in mid range and we're weaker in shortened position or lengthened position.
Mm-hmm.
And what you'll see a lot of times in like a rehabilitation or sticking points is you'll see contractions done, isometrics done in a shortened position. And so if this is a biomechanically or physiologically weakened position, from a tissue perspective, it's going to rely more on nervous system input. So if you're trying to more focus on the communication to that, I know that if I had pain or range of motion issues or some stability issues, I would be doing isometrics in a shortened position. So if you guys can see my screen. So let's
Yeah.
say let's say I had some pec issues and I felt like I wanted to increase activity there. I could go into horizontal adduction, hold that. Now this looks like a stretch, right? This is how you usually stretch your shoulder, but instead of
Right.
pulling this direction, I'm going to just to have this hand here as a brace. I'm going to push my hand into that, and then I'm just going to hold that position. It's almost, if you do that right now, whether you do it here, like, because a lot of times I do this with the glute, but if you just go across the body and try to impose a little bit of force, and so it's going to be, so John, you're doing it right now. It's your right arm that you're pushing through,
Right.
and you can kind of feel that contract, and it almost feels a little like crampy. If you
Yeah.
think about when you do regular pressing, like very rarely when you do a press, do you ever go from here, like that's about it, that's lockout. When do you
Mm-hmm.
ever visit this 30 degrees or 40 degrees of range of motion, right? If you look at squatting, right, when you look at, let's see here, I'm going to show you my butt. All right, so here's my hip here. So when you look
Mm-hmm.
at squatting, when you squat, you're going from this position to this position. When do you ever visit this 15 to 20 degrees of hip extension, right? This is the
Right.
shortest position that I can get my glute into. So when we spend all this time training through here and here, do we neglect that shortest position? So if you can intentionally spend some time in those shortened positions, which we usually don't, right? Like you think about like bicep, like you do curls, right? This is the shortest position of bicep. Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
not, because it's an elbow flexor and a shoulder flexor. So really, this is the shortest position that bicep can get into. So if you wanted to increase the quality of your cross bridging, just getting stronger in that shortened range, spending time there, you're going to have carryover effects throughout the rest of the range of motion. So if you get stronger
Okay.
with shortened range with lower loads, the thought process is you'll get stronger in mid range with your normal loads.
Okay.
So that's
So
the
like
first way. The
if
other
you're doing
way is through the speed of contraction. So let's see here. So we have this force velocity relationship where we have speed of contraction can affect force output. The slower you go, the stronger you are. The faster you contract, the weaker you are. And so if you regularly train, like if you wanted to maximize like tissue stimulus for muscle and you had like just to do one type of lifting, you
mm-hmm.
would go as fast as you can positively in the concentric, so explosive lifting in this direction. And the evidence shows that you actually get like highest number of muscle motor unit recruitments with explosive movements. So you'd go concentrically, you would pause at the transition. So just kind of take a moment and pause at the isometric aspect. And then you would take your time very deliberately going down in the eccentric phase. So as fast as you can here and as slow as you can there. And that's when you would be maximizing muscle tension and tissue. Now, you'd be straining the heck out of the tissue. So do I always train explosively and always emphasize negatives? No, it all depends on what did I do 2 days before, or what do I have in my training schedule. But if I'm
Mm-hmm.
working out only once or twice a week, then I'm doing that. If I'm going to do like 1 or 2 sets to failure, and those are that's it. That's my training stimulus. I'm exploding through I'm trying to push as, like if I'm doing a push up, I'm trying to push off the ground as fast as I can. I'm holding
Yeah.
it and I'm
Okay.
coming down really slow, pausing at the bottom, and then trying to push out from that position.
Gotcha. That's not something you do every time you train, is what
No,
you're
but I
saying.
do, like if you look at so if we'll get to this in KIN 231, and if you eventually take KIN 231. And I actually have good news. I don't know if for those that didn't take KIN 231 this semester, we're actually going to offer it next semester. So if you want a more of a practical application of these things, will be offered next semester. But if you look up like, let's do tempo training. Let's do EIC. So normally we're all familiar with like sets and reps, right? When we do 12 reps or we do 3 sets, like we kind of know what that is. And that's usually how you manipulate or manage load. You'll say, hey, if you work out on a 12 rep range, that's going to have a certain physiological output. And if you work out in like a 6 or 8 rep range, you're going to have a different outlook. Well, one of the most underutilized training variables is this concept of tempo. And if you think of all lifts, like when you're sitting here and you do like a push up or a bench press or a squat, you have a phase with gravity, your eccentric phase, and then you have your reset, your concentric phase back up. And let's just go. Let's go to T Nation. Let's pick an article and see if they have some images here that we can steal from. Yeah, nothing too. But anyways, what I want to focus on is this where'd it go? This EIC format, and you can either do EIC, where you have like your eccentric, isometric, concentric phase. So that would mean like in a squat, you would have your initiation movement. You're going from your standing position down to like a seated position. That would be your eccentric phase. You have your transition, like in the hole, where you transition from going down to going up. That's your isometric phase. And then you have your drive coming out of the hole. That's your concentric phase. That's a 3-letter acronym, but you technically have 6 of these. You have an isometric phase that precedes the eccentric. Then you have the EIC, and then you have an additional, 5. You have an isometric phase that follows after the concentric. But sometimes people just kind of bolt those together into one. Your reps between are the same, but that doesn't have to be true. But for the most part, depending upon how you emphasize eccentric, isometric, concentric, you can take 2 sets of 10, and you can have 3 different outcomes of that same lift, same exercise, same weight by manipulating how long you take on the descent versus how long you take on the ascent, right? And you can do this either explosively, as fast as possible. If you remember, I think I have it in this. Yeah. So if we look at our outcomes, we have let me just change this to match the EIC acronym right now. But you have eccentric, isometric, concentric, and you have some of these highlights in this where you're about 20% stronger eccentrically than you are concentrically. But with that increased strength, you have increased, right? So you're going to have more. So if I emphasize more concentric. If I'm only training a week, or I'm for like tissue strength or mass or whatever I'm doing, I might heavily emphasize eccentrics and get that tissue stimulus because I'm only days, right? So you got an upper body day, lower body day. I'm beating the hell out of eccentric. But if I'm upper body pushing day, upper body pulling day, because I'm trying to preserve deltoid and joint integrity, I might minimize eccentric or maybe not do too many most concentric. Isometric, this is where I was talking about the allows for better force generation. I would spend some time isometric there and visit that isometric. Those shortened positions and force the contraction, you are kind of establishing that wire communication between the brain and the nervous system. You're forcing the body to produce force in its most disadvantaged position. So if you get better at doing that, you're going to be able to generate force better throughout its advantaged positions.
So like an example of that could be like if you're doing dumbbell lateral raises, just kind of holding it out like a 10-pound dumbbell, 15-pound dumbbell for, I don't know, 8 to 10 seconds or something like that.
Well, look what you're doing right now. You did horizontal, you did regular abduction, right? How far can you go into abduction?
Well, usually
why'd you stop? Go all the way up, right there. Now, if you lift a dumbbell there, you're really not getting too much load because it's kind of pushing down. But what if you took a cable, and you have it attached against the wall, and you did this and you tried to hold your head against? I mean, just try that. I mean, do that in the gym. You'll hate me, right? You'll be like, that sucks. It cramped. And this is when this is when the elastics, like the tubing, becomes really useful because now you can generate a little bit of overpressure even if you took a pillow and put it between your and just try to squeeze that,
Mm-hmm.
you would feel like the trap coming in. You'd feel the deltoid coming in. You would feel muscles work in ways you never felt before, right?
Okay.
Just to be able to get stronger, because when we do lateral raises, you stop right there.
Right.
Well, have you neglected that the last 50% of the range of motion? You get to do creative things where if you have someone in a bench press, you got dumbbells here, because the reason why you don't go here is because from this point, from here to there, you have resistance. And now if I start to go this way, it's kind of actually pulling me into this direction with the assistance. But if
Right.
you had like cables and you were doing cables, and now you can actually go all the way across. And that's why people do cable crossovers, is because you can get that last 30% of that range of motion that you've been neglecting just doing this. So yeah, it's about getting into the shortened position, not just holding it, but getting into the shortened position.
Okay.
It's the shortened position that's the key, not just the isometric.
Gotcha.
But if you, so what's cool about isometrics, and we didn't talk about it because I think it's more advanced. Let me just pull up an image here real quick and see if I can find something really quick here. Do I want 15? Let's just see what happens here. 15 degrees. Let's get an image. All right, so if I have 15 degrees here, and now I have 30 degrees, because I went 15 degrees up, 15 degrees down. If you hold a position isometrically right here, wherever you get stronger, you'll get stronger 15 degrees in either direction. So if you have sticking points in certain lifts or areas of weakness or even pain, let's say
Mm-hmm.
you're painful. Let me get my screen marker on here real quick. All right, so if I'm here and I'm holding a load right there, and if I just hold it right there, I will get stronger in this position, and I'll get stronger 15 degrees into flexion and 15 degrees into extension. So let's say I'm doing an elbow, let's do curl. I'm hanging at 90 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So if I just do isometrics and I hold that, I'll get stronger in that position, but I wouldn't necessarily get stronger up here, or I wouldn't get stronger down here. But let's say I have pain right here, like right at this position, right? And or I have weakness there. Like I notice like in my squat that I start to give out a little bit, or a chin up, that's my sticking point. I just can't get right there. So what I would do is I would do an isometric in that position, because you are stronger isometrically than you are concentrically. And so you can hold that there, or especially on the eccentric, like if I'm coming down, maybe I pause right there and I hold that isometric. So I'm spending time there generating muscle tension. The reason why you're weak there could be a multitude of reasons. It could be because of the motor recruitment. It could be because of the biomechanics. It could be because of the joint stability in that position. But you do know that if you hold that, you're able to hold it, you are building all of those three. So you don't need to identify, is it the nervous system? Is it the articular system? Is it the muscle system? You're just looking at the output and, hey, I'm going to hold that position. And over time, I'll get stronger because I'm being very deliberate there. So too often, and that's the thing with the tempo, is people will do their lifts and they'll drop down and in and out, right? And so your true control, or your true like teaching, coaching, we talk about this in KIN 214, is that you should be able to deliberately stop at any point during your lift. And if you can't do that, you might be skipping that point of that weakness, and you're not, and that's always going to be holding you back. So what's
Mm-hmm.
keeping you from going from a 220 to a 230 bench press, or a 300 to a 330 squat, it might not be the load. It might be that one particular sticking point that for whatever reason your body's not comfortable with. And if you're just going rapidly down and rapidly coming up, you're skipping over. You never even know it's there. But if you go slow and you can pause, like I would even do an assessment. Sometimes when I'm assessing people, I'll have them going step by step. Like I'll have them descend slow and ask them, oh, stop right there. Okay, go down a little lower. Okay, stop right there. And we'll find a point that they can't. And then sometimes we'll just say, okay, let's find that and let's hold it. Now, if they can't hold it, what's cool, and then we'll go back to the screen here with the 15 degrees, is let's say they can't hold it, but let's say they can hold just below it. So if you hold, let's say they right there's a sticking point. If they can't hold it there, but let's say they can hold it there, perfect. You'll get stronger there. You'll get stronger for that 15 degrees above that. So that's where isometrics work. It's either contracting in the shortened position, so you're manipulating the aspect, or getting stronger for the sticking points or painful points. It's kind of neat, right? It's so simple. It's not like this, like, you didn't need a whole textbook on it, and you don't need to take this weekend course. Just freaking hold the position, right? Do some isometrics. Just thinking outside the box a little bit. And again, the shortened position and these isometrics, because I think isometrics are overlooked a lot, but people are looking at isometrics from this traditional like descent and ascent. But really, if you understand what's happening eccentrically, isometrically, and concentrically, you can start using it for manipulation. Like I said, I think for this test, understanding that we're about 20% stronger eccentrically than we are concentrically is good. It kind of goes along with this aspect. But when we get into KIN 231, we talk about manipulating those variables a little bit more and we basically just did it. I mean, there's not much more from it. From there, we just go through examples. But great question. Great question.
Thank you.
You also see some things on the market like electrical stim and like temperature, like you could like in a heated environment versus a cold environment that can change like so I mean, there's other things you can do like potentiation to help increase the cross bridging, but I think this is the most simple, is how you lift the weight is just as important as how many reps you do and how many sets you do. Any other questions? Just a reminder, when I'm sharing my screen, I don't see the chat function. So if you put something in chat, I'm missing it. Okay. I think we were pretty thorough last. Did I go through the cardiovascular system and the respiratory last week with the? Okay.
Yeah, you did.
One
You
thing
did that
I
last
wanted
week.
to talk about, which I didn't go into detail, was more this spinal stabilization in the core. And let me pull up my lecture from that so we can go through some of those slides. Okay, so what we're talking about is this diaphragm, and the diaphragm is really the separation between the chest cavity and the abdominal contents. And the chest cavity is mostly airspace, and the abdominal contents is mostly liquid. And it's good to visualize the diaphragm as a bowl, and like an upside down bowl, because it is like a dome. And we kind of take you through some of these the anatomy of the diaphragm. But again, really, you have your airspace here that's separated from the water or liquid, your abdominal contents. And when we look at restful or normal breathing, this is belly breathing, where air is coming in, the diaphragm's coming down, and it's pushing the abdominal contents out. Like that's what's supposed to be happening. So that's what we're seeing here with this: is the diaphragm contracts, it pushes down, and it pushes out on the abdominal contents. And when the diaphragm relaxes, it's changing the volume here again. And what's happening, just a quick review of the respiratory, is it's changing the volume. This volume space, as the abdominal contracts, that the floor of the bowl, the bottom of the bowl, gets closer. Oops, what happened here? Okay. And so this volume increases, and it creates a vacuum, sucking air into the lungs. And then when the diaphragm relaxes, it pushes everything back, and it's elastic recoil. And that's why I have the balloon depicted here for the elastic recoil. And this is the plunger. As I pull that plunger back, air is going to get sucked into the tip there. All right. So that's the basic mechanics of breathing. But what if the abdominal muscles didn't relax and they maintained a little bit of pressure? We start to get this concept of spinal stabilization. And when we look here at the diaphragm, we have this one bowl right here. We have another bowl right there, and then we have this transverse abdominis. And when we look at like physical properties of material, gas is very compressible. There's a lot of empty space in gas, so there's a lot of empty space there. When we look at liquid, there's not that much space, and so when we look at the compressibility of a full water bottle, it's not compressible. When we compare that to an empty water bottle, it's fairly compressible. And so when we look at now this pressurization that's occurring, if we have the diaphragm pushing down because like you pressurize, like holding your breath, and you've tightened around the pelvic girdle there through the transverse abdominis, and you can see the kind of the fibers here that are running parallel. This runs from your back all the way around. So like I always joke around that it's like a let's see, a boxing championship belt. Yeah, it's right there. Perfect. See, Google reads my mind. So it's like one of these belts, and it's shaped that it kind of comes big in the front and it wraps all the way around. And it's very similar to like a weightlifting belt. And you've seen people in the gym wear these things. And I think I had made a comment that most people wear these wrong, that these should be really tight around the body. So tight that you actually suck your breath in. You do a, let's see, abdominal vacuum. Yep. I mean, this is extreme, right? But this is what bodybuilders used to do to kind of create that space. But what's happening here is that this is a full contraction of the transverse abdominal. And so just the transverse, so just this muscle right here, and you're relaxing the diaphragm and the pelvic floor because the abdominal contents have to go somewhere. You are sucking and like just to be able to do this, a lot of times this is a good exercise in itself to start to zero in on the TVA, the transverse abdominis, so that you can start to just initiate that muscle for coordination. And I think like Evelyn was asking the questions last week, how do you train that? And it's more coordination. But like this image right here shows that with gravity down, you are sucking your stomach in. You can see Arnold Schwarzenegger doing it there. And again, this is a bodybuilding maneuver so that you can show off your chest cavity and your abdominals. But you would never do this before you squat or deadlift, right? You would depressurize the spine. But it just shows what the diaphragm can do. But you do suck this in. Then you put one of these weightlifting belts on. You're not sucking in that quite, but then what it's doing is it's creating an additional pressure that you can actually now, instead of having to kind of stabilize, you can actually bear down and exert. And so as the diaphragm and the pelvic floor hold, you create an offloading pressure in both of these directions. Where's my, here we go. Oops, that's too big. It's too small. Just right. You create an off pressure this direction because you have this abdominal belt on, and you're putting pressure through the diaphragm and through so kind of depicted right here. And so then what that does is it creates a resisted force to compression, so that if you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 pounds on your back, that is going through the pressurized abdominal contents and not through the vertebra of the spine. That's kind of this whole inner unit concept of the abdominal core. And this is where you can have people that have really strong, let's see here. They have really strong rectus abdominis and really strong obliques, and they do sit-ups all freaking day, but that's not the inner unit. This is where when someone is diagnosed with a weak core or they need to do some core work, it's not the freaking abdominals, it's not the obliques, it's the transverse abdominis, the diaphragm, multifidus, and pelvic floor. It could be the strength of that, but most likely it's the coordination of that needs to be resolved. So this is where you often get people that are it's the popular diagnosis right now. Oh, I need to do some core work to stabilize the back pain. So anyone that has back pain, anyone that has anything or a weak anything, it's always given to the core. But what most people don't realize is that this is what they're referring to is these four muscles, the coordination of that. And so the core is like, here's your liquid guts that are pressurized. It's actually the water in here that's actually that's stabilizing. There's the back of the pelvic of the core, right? That's the multifidus, and this is like, you can see some of the deep back muscles. This is the abdominal musculature that's usually given the core, and most people try to look at it visually as a six-pack, even though the rectus abdominis is not the primary muscle of the trunk. It's the obliques that are the powerhouse. And so the inner unit, what it's doing, it's pressurizing these abdominal contents so it can get this upward pressure. So it's a solid water bottle. So all this fluid can be pressurized to decrease loads through the spine. You know, and then when we get into my computer's acting slow right now for some reason. There we go. We have the inner unit, and then we have this outer unit, which then we get into this shoulder girdle, pelvic girdle interaction. And again, this is getting more advanced stuff. So all this is meant to be as an introduction. This is the inner unit. This is the stabilization aspect. This is the force generation and the movement aspect through that pelvic girdle, shoulder girdle interaction. And it's not so much the strength of these individual muscles, but how well do these muscles work together, particularly like if we look at the posterior oblique system, which I did in the video, you can see that the latissimus dorsi and the glute max, they work through this thoracolumbar fascia. And if you're through gait with the arm going forward and leg going back, this is generating force, and then this one is absorbing force. And if you're doing something like a squat, so that's absorbing force. And if you're doing something like a squat, you have both of these posterior oblique systems both working. That's what's helping you out of that position for the squat or the deadlift. And then also in the thoracolumbar fascia, you have your external oblique, internal oblique, transverse abdominis, everything integrated through here. So instead of just the glute doing the work, the body's able to synergistically take in other muscles and produce that force. And that's your core. So your lat, I would argue that your lat and your glute are more core muscles than your rectus abdominis, right? That's not true, but I'm just saying that your lat and your glute are just as much of your core, just as important for the outer unit than your abdominals, which get all the attention. But your real core, where dysfunction's happening, is here in this inner unit. And I think outside of that, everything else is pretty straightforward. The cardiovascular system is what it is. Any questions on this at all? No? Come on, John, I need a good question from you. Give me some more to talk about.
I guess, for the inner unit of the core, what would be some exercises that can increase the muscle mass?
So,
or to work out the inner core?
Can you, well, I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
What would be exercises that would work out the inner core?
So just doing the exercise themselves, like squatting, deadlifting, anything that requires spinal stabilization. So if you can see someone that maintain a neutral spine throughout the full range of motion, the reason why they're able to do that is because of this pressurization, especially if it's under load, and it's a load that they can do that's heavy weight for them. If it's just like, hey, you're squatting. The other thing is being able to coordinate this. So can you engage the transverse abdominis? So that would be these vacuums that I was showing here. Being able to kind of suck the stomach in. Like if you just sit here right now and you sit upright and you try to draw your belly button into your spine and you do it while you can still have it, like you're still breathing. If you hold that, you'll start to feel like here, and here's your belly, and you suck it in. You can see I can't quite get as much as there, but you are engaging, and you can start, you suck it in even further. And I'm not doing it through holding my breath. The diaphragm has to be relaxed, but I can start to feel it along the sides there. And it's something you can do while you're sitting in the car and you just kind of hold it in and then out, right? You're working the transverse abdominis in isolation. You're not supposed to. It's supposed to be coordinated together, but just the fact that you can engage that and start strengthening that. Are you familiar with Kegel exercises? Like where you kind of, if you're urinating, you stop the flow of urination, that kind of hold that. Like that's another thing. That's the pelvic floor musculature. So I'm not going to drop my pants and show you that, but those are the pelvic floor muscles. But just that exercise, and then this is where the breathing aspect, like the deep breathing and aspects from there. And then there's for the other exercise for the transverse and multifidus, there's a whole bunch of sonography, ultrasound, MRI work that they're exploring to find out what are the best exercises to like isolate the multifidus. But I guess my question is do you really need to isolate this, or do you just need to train it? And is it through like your breathing breath work? And that's where most people would say is that it's through your, like I said, I think I said the NASM. They'll tell you that they tell you that if you want to have your clients, what they'll tell you to do is they'll set something up like this and say, okay, try to pull your shirt away and try to engage the inner unit. Well, I don't know if sucking in is really engaging. Really, if someone's going to come up and say, hey, I'm going to hit you in the stomach and you're going to brace for impact, that's pressurizing the inner unit. That's the engaging. So are you doing that? Are you maintaining that pressure? And then like when you're under sympathetic stress, you are you're breathing heavily, can you control the diaphragm and still remain pressured and do more like controlled, like short, shallow breaths? Someone that's detrained or not trained or not used to putting forces on their body, they might not be able to have that breathing or that rhythmic breathing down. Most people that are training take it for granted that you are timing your breathing with your lift. You're usually inhaling on the way down because that's the easier phase, and then you tend to be exhaling like that pressure breathing on the way out, sticking points, and most people want to hold their breath. But that's something that is taken for granted by a lot of athletes now. You look at the general population that's not used to doing strenuous work, and they're doing regular load or do something, their breathing was off, and that's usually when they hurt their back. It's probably because they depressurized their inner unit.
Now, for wearing belts in the gym, like if you're squatting, if you wear a belt over time, does that make the inner unit weaker?
That's the argument of the belts, is that if you look at most power lifters who know how to use belts, they will use it only judiciously in their last couple reps, so like personal best or last 1 or 2 reps and they're tired. But for the most part, they're not using it because they want this system to do the job. They want those muscles to get stronger.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why you don't want to wear the belt all the time, unless you have some surgical or some medical condition that warrants that. A lot of times what those belts do is they mostly give feedback. So like they'll put the belt on and it gives feedback, not so much for like muscle stimulus, but to maintain like a lumbopelvic, like you can see that the curvature in the back, and really can they maintain that pelvic position. They roll, because if you put a belt on and you have it tight, it's hard to kind of flex the, you got something,
Right.
you got material right here, right? You got the belt right here. So it's hard for you to cinch down. So you're going to keep your pelvis, instead of tucked under, you're actually going to keep your pelvis back. And it's almost like a biofeedback for maintaining appropriate pelvic positioning. This is the most personal I've ever gotten on a video call here, so it's and it's being recorded too. So. No, but I think the belts are okay. Some of them too have like the curvature to it for like you see them like in Home Depot that they'll have them on for like, those are more just like biofeedback type aspects. So there's something to that as well. But the belt itself is really meant to enhance this inner unit, not just hang around the waist as you do curls.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely under exercises that you're putting loading through the through that tissue. So like deadlift, squat, and that's about it. I don't really would know any other exercise that would require that. Like even leg press. I see people sometimes with belts. I was like, what are you doing? Blood flow through the heart made sense to everyone. That's really all we're looking at. The cardiovascular system is looking at making sure you know the 4 valves. 1, 2, nope, 4 valves. Yep. I don't have them listed here. I don't know why I don't have them listed here. Well, anyways, the 4 chambers, the 4 valves. So the tricuspid, the mitral valve, the pulmonary valve, and the aorta valve. And then the right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. Is there anything else you guys want me to review or go over? Or I got the other lecture too. Let me pull that up, the nervous system.
Can you go over, I think it was lecture 3.2, active and passive insufficiency?
Yeah. It might be here. Let me see. Yeah, it's right here. Okay. Okay, so when we look at active and passive insufficiency, it's really talking about this length-tension relationship. And remember, when we're in a lengthened position or shortened position, we have decreased force output. You're strongest mid-range. And when we look at this concept of biarticulate muscles, these are muscles that cross more than one joint. You have the ability to influence the length based on starting position or the change of the position of a joint somewhere else. So like the hamstring is the best example. When you have the hamstring here, this crosses both the hip and the knee. And so if you look at it from a hip extensor or a knee flexor, if you wanted to maximally shorten the hamstring, you would bend the knee as much. You try to bring your heel to your butt, and let's say you were laying on the floor. Let's rotate this guy. So if this was him here, if I wanted to maximally shorten the hamstring, I would try to bring my heel. What am I doing? I would try to bring my heel to my butt, and then once my heel's at my butt, I'm going to try to lift my knee straight up in the air. So I'm doing like a donkey kick fully, and that would most likely cause most people to cramp, right? And if you try to do that and try to maintain that, you would be in a maximally shortened position. Conversely, if I wanted to be in a maximally lengthened position, like I wanted to stretch my hamstring, you would flip this person. Oops. I'd be on my back here, and I'd keep my leg as straight as possible, and I'd try to bring a straight leg raise. So my leg would be sticking up here, and I'd be trying to bring it as far as I can. And now I'm maximally lengthening because I'm flexing at the hip, and I'm locked at the knee. So the previous position where I had it flipped over, that would be the actively insufficient position. I am maximally shortened. I can't shorten anymore, and so I can't generate any more force. This position here, the fully lengthened position, that would be I can't lengthen. I'm pulled. I'm stretched out as far as I can. That would be the passively insufficient position. So then how that plays out in real life, right? Okay, so good. We understand these concepts of active insufficiency and passive insufficiency. They both yield to decreased force output. But how that plays out is like here, we have our hamstring. It's shortened here at the hip because it's a hip extensor, and it's lengthened at the knee because it's a knee extensor or knee flexor. And if I go down and I try to touch my toes, this is that whether I'm on my back doing it or on my toes, I'm fully lengthened here, lengthened here. So then what you'll see often is you'll see the body try to cheat or creep out of other positions. Since the hamstring is biarticulate, it crosses the hip and the knee, I can give a little slack here so that I can get more range of motion here, right? So you're basically unraveling the line, the spool here, so then it can be longer up here, so you can go further in that range of motion. You see the same thing happen with like the gastroc. The gastroc is both, or the calf crosses both the knee and the ankle. And so when I'm truly trying to do my range of motion here at the ankle for ankle dorsiflexion, I'm limited by the length of the gastroc. Well, if I give a little slack there in the knee, and I take it out of its passive insufficiency, I can give it a little bit more length. So this is you actively doing it. What the body tries to do is it tries to do most of its function. It tries to stay in this mid-range as much as possible. It avoids this and avoids this because you get weak and you need more energy to do that. So then what you'll see often is like in a squatting position. So when someone is, when you're squatting, like the hamstrings, that when you squat, your hamstrings are generating tension the entire time, but there's really no change in length. And this is what this image is depicting here, is that when I go down, I'm lengthening at the hip and I'm shortening at the knee. So I'm at 40 centimeters, whether I'm standing or I'm in a seated position, because the body is trying to maintain this mid-range position the entire way. So the hamstring really acts like a stabilizer during this entire aspect. And this is where you'll see a lot of times with this butt winking with squatting, is that the hamstring doesn't have enough either strength or length. It's usually, people say that the hamstrings are too tight, but that's not necessarily true. Sometimes it's the hamstring strength, because it's getting out of this mid-range position, or the body's trying to avoid desperately getting out of its strong position. So a lot of times people think it's passively insufficient and your hamstrings are tight. You stretch your hamstrings to be able to maintain this pelvis position. I would argue that your hamstring's doing everything it can to maintain mid-range because it doesn't want to go into this weaker position. So you actually have some hamstring weakness that you've never noticed because you're going too fast in your squat. So if you start spending more time in like that seated position and isometrically hold that, you start to get better strength there. And then you're able to now go and squat without the body's trying to maintain that mid-range position. The same is true for the hip flexors. A lot of times hip flexor weakness, because we spend so much time in sitting down, our hip flexors aren't strong enough to stabilize. And so they're avoiding. So your body is really good. That's what compensation is. Like when you stub your toe, your body immediately changes its gait pattern so it can find the biomechanically most efficient way to do that. And if this is true here, where you're shorter the muscle, you have decreased force output. The longer the muscle, decreased force output, you're putting your body at a disadvantage. And so the body's going to do everything it can to stay right here in this mid-range. And if that means distort your position, your posture temporarily, so that so you're getting this rounded out butt wing so that you can maintain this position, your body's going to say, hey, we need to maintain this load in the moment. We don't need to care about long-term aspect. But if that hamstring gets stronger and it gets more stable, it will allow you to get out of that position and lengthen out a little bit so you can maintain that pelvic neutral position.
So if you're squatting and that butt wink occurs
right here, yep,
over time, does that put a lot of stress on the low back?
it does.
Okay.
And that's where there's a cool video. Let's look at what's her name, Esther Gocal, TED Talk. I'll share this link here. But if this is a great, Esther Gocal's great. She's got a great book. She's a Pilates. But this TED Talk she gives, I usually show this in my Intro to Kinesiology class. But it talks about this primal posture and position. And so many times, if you look at like any type of ergonomic ergo chairs, you'll see it always emphasizing like this. We'll take this chair right here. Perfect first one we found. How you gonna take for an hour to load? Just give me the freaking image. Of course. Well, anyways, any type of the ergo chairs. I just closed my phone. What you'll see is it all emphasizes like the lumbar spine, about maintaining that lumbar curve, everything. But that's actually not the case at all. And if you look at the spine, like the pelvis is the foundation of the. Let's just do pelvis, which pops up here. I'll find an image. So you can see here that like the pelvis is the base of the spine, and where the pelvis goes, the spine goes. And so when you look at the spine itself, we're supposed to see that curvature, but there's supposed to be a very particular relationship that L5S1 is supposed to interact. And so everyone's trying to emphasize this curve. Well, if you look at how most people sit like if they had a tail, that the tail's tucked between their legs. I would guarantee everyone sitting right now, you have a posterior pelvic tilt, so that your pelvis is actually rotated backwards and you're flattening out your back. And what happens is that it's not so much that puts a lot of stress on there, because it's really not that much load. But over time, you start to get shortened positions. You start to get weak in those positions, and your body actually favors that tucked under position. And then we start to lose that ability to roll the pelvis back. And if it's near impossible to roll your pelvis back and maintain lumbar flexion. Like if you roll your pelvis back and you kind of now, if you adjust your seat and now your tail you're not sitting on your tail anymore, you'll notice an immediate change in your posture. And now if you just relax back into your chair, what happens now is that all the muscles of the spine can relax, and now you can get circulation, you get blood flow, and you get repair. And what happens over time, if you squat like this, you are jamming into that position. And so like, look at butt wink. We'll see all types of bad examples of that. Yeah, and so like this is maintaining appropriate tension. Now the facet joints and everything can be compressed the way it's supposed to compress, and you don't have to worry about disc damage. This, you're putting pressure on the disc, right? And so it's not the squat is bad, it's that the lumbar position is bad. And this comes back to the inner unit, and it comes back now to this active and passive insufficiency of muscles of the outer unit that are causing that dysfunction. They stretch the hell out of their hamstrings. Well, the hamstrings weren't really tight in the first. They shouldn't be tight, because you're maximally shortening here. I'm sorry, you're maximally shortening here, but you're maximally lengthening there. So the muscle's not really. We already showed in this image here, the muscle's not changing length. So it's not about hamstring tightness. It's about hamstring weakness and the body avoiding the actively and passively insufficient positions. And that comes, so it's cool because this actually is pulling together everything we talked about today. If you do your lifts too fast, where you don't spend time in the concentric or eccentric phase, you might miss that you actually have some weak. You're like, oh, my hamstrings are fine. I can squat fine. Well, let's slow it down and let's have you stop at a certain position and see how you handle that. So here's like in the slides, the actively insufficient, passively insufficient. So the isometrics that we were talking about earlier is you're basically putting the muscle in an actively insufficient position and making it stronger in that position. So you're actually training, and so you get better at active insufficiency. And then passively insufficiency is more stretching, flexibility. You can do different things for this. You can either stretch like most people do, or you can address the root of the problem, which is usually some kind of stability aspect, which then is resolved through positional holds.
So passively insufficient is fully lengthened?
Correct. Like you don't have enough more, you don't have a range of motion. So like if you take your wrist and you, like if you see how your fingers are, so your wrist, what happens in the wrist, the anatomy here is you have your wrist flexors, the muscles that flex your wrist, they also bend your fingers. And the muscles that extend your wrist, they also, now you do have some isolated wrist flexors and wrist extensors, but the muscles that do this, if you grab your forearm and you make a fist, you'll feel those muscles come in. So from a passively insufficient, if you just go into wrist extension, you'll notice that your fingers naturally bend into flexion. You didn't have to do that. And even if you try to extend, you can't get your fingers fully straight. And the only way you can do that is if you come out of wrist extension a little bit. So what's happening is that the muscle length here and the tendons don't change much, is that as I'm going full extension, I'm lengthening here, I'm becoming passively insufficient. My body is bending the fingers a little bit so I get more wrist extension. Same thing with wrist flexion. You go into wrist flexion, your fingers actually straighten out. Like you didn't have to do finger extension. Now, if you try to make a fist, it's going to hurt, right? There's like cramping.
Yeah.
So so what's happening here is you're getting passive insufficiency of the wrist extensors, finger extensors. And then when you try to contract, that's active insufficiency of the wrist and finger flexors. They usually go hand in hand. One's the agonist and one's the antagonist. If you're fully shortened, that means you have to be fully lengthened somewhere else. Right. If you're fully lengthened, you have to be shortened somewhere else. That's that agonist-antagonist relationship that exists. Yeah, I find it fascinating. It goes so simple. But then they play on each other because we as trainers or people that are working out or coaches, we always focus on like what muscle can't do its job. Like, oh, the hamstrings are tight, so let's tighten the hamstring. So if we look at this image here, we would say, hey, I can't touch my toes. It's a hamstring problem. Well, it could be a hamstring problem. Is it a length problem? I don't know. I would say it's a strength problem, but it can be a strength problem either at, where's all my shapes at? It could be a strength problem here at the hamstring, or it could be a strength problem here at the hip flexors. So like the hip flexors or even the abdominal muscles, they're not strong enough because if these are passively insufficient, that must mean these are actively insufficient. So everyone always just looks here at the passive insufficiency at the tight muscle, but you have a whole 50% of the problem could be coming from the active insufficiency as well, from the weakness. And the weakness can either be from the agonist or from the antagonist.
It's like when you're squatting for the butt wink, it could be a combination of weakness in the hamstrings, hip flexors, and also the inner unit of the core.
Yep. Okay. And all those things you mentioned before you said the inner unit, those are all outer unit muscles, the hip flexors, the hamstrings, the glutes. So yeah, the butt wink is, and it's usually pretty easily corrected. It takes time. And then when you start to see it mostly is during like really heavy load or deep positions of the squat. And then you change it, like you modify it. And then what I would do is I would go back to this little slide that I created. If someone's getting a butt wink, like I would stop right maybe 2 or 3 degrees shy of that, that position, train there for like 6 to 8 weeks, and you would see that they were able to get deeper and deeper with each week. But most people just say, hey, screw it, we're going to go into the deep squat and I'll get stronger over time. Well, all you're doing is reinforcing that position. What I would do is that if they're squatting and right about there, they're not getting parallel, big deal, right? They're squat. But if they're getting down to like 45 degrees or 60 degrees, and at 60 degrees they're butt winking, I would stop them at 55 degrees right before they butt wink, get stronger, and then they're going to get stronger from 55 degrees to 80 degrees. They're going to get that 15-degree carryover, or 70 degrees. I added 10 degrees.
Now, sometimes people put like a box underneath. Is that different than holding the position at the bottom?
Yeah, because it's a box. If they're just using it as a sensory feedback where their butt's coming down and they're just touching it, and that's giving them how deep they can go. And that's a good cue, right? Maybe some people don't know that they're butt waking. A lot of times people don't even feel that this is happening. But if they put a box here, it's actually got a box, right? And their butt touches and they come up, that's great. But a lot of times what you'll see is people like they'll sit on the box and they'll come up. Well, the problem is that you can't hold this position in the bottom. So if you have the box do it, you're not, the box is doing the work, not you. You're not going to get stronger there. Really what the box squat is doing is it's forcing, if we go back to the tempo aspect with the eccentric, isometric, and concentric, what the box is doing is it's deliberately, so when you go down in the position, you're kind of winding up the muscles, and then you're using it as a slingshot to get yourself out of that position. And if you pause in that bottom position for even a half second, you get rid of that elastic recoil, and now your body's able to get out of that position. So what the box is doing is it's giving them a place to break, so then they have to generate even more force to get out of that position. But if I'll tell you, if they're sitting and they're loaded, I mean, sitting's already shitty for the spine, and you do it with load, like if you're not maintaining perfect position, that's bad news. So it's good for me. I'll take them on as a patient for the herniated. Yeah, great set of questions. I like how they all link together with the tempo to the range of motion carryover, active, passive insufficiency. So that was awesome. And again, most of this is outside the scope of this particular exam. The fundamentals of this are like understanding active and passive insufficiency, understanding some of the basic concepts of eccentric and concentric, where you're stronger, where you're weaker. Like the whole putting it all together, I think, is value in terms of the practical application of. I mean, how does someone not just watch the last 30 minutes of this video and not change the way they squat and change the way they approach the body? And that's the thing, is people are usually trying to use too heavy a load, when really if you just drop it by like just 15%, 20%, you could actually go slower, be more productive. And I would argue that like people, because what gets gains, what creates muscle adaptation is muscle tension. And you can do it either through total tension, through total load, so like 200 pounds, or you can do it through time under tension, where let's say you drop it to 180 pounds, but now you change the way you lift. And if you took that 180 pounds and you were trying to be as explosive as you can on the concentric phase, and you slowed down on the eccentric phase, thus making it heavier, you would still fail at like 8 reps or 10 reps. But that 180, what did I say? I forgot my numbers, but whatever weight, that 180 pounds versus the 200 pounds, you actually get stronger faster using 180 pounds than you would with just using 200 pounds. And I've coached many clients through that, right? And about the quality, not just like the let's just do it.
Do you believe more in time under tension or total tension? Or
you need both.
Combination of both.
What you need is motor unit recruitment. And so heavy loads do that, but you can get, it's also based on, there's an image I just recently found that I saved. Let me see if I can find it. It's related to this series. It's related to this research article. Let's see if you can find it. Yeah, perfect. Good. This is it. So if you just lift a heavy weight right here, you'll see the motor unit recruitment, right? Which is good. The more motor recruitment you're getting, the more cross bridging, the more muscle fiber stimulus and so forth. If you do a light load with a slow, so this is looking at like the total load versus time under tension, but you won't get as much motor unit recruitment because the speed's not there. But if you lift fast and you do more of that explosive lifting, you'll get that motor unit recruitment. So you still need to lift heavy weights, right? Not only that, but you're also putting load on connective tissue. You're putting load on the ligaments, and so that needs to be stimulated. The problem is you lift heavy all the time, and that's where you start to get the tissue degeneration. So you still lift heavy weights, but the way I would look at it is like 80% of my time I'd be lifting like time under tension, and then once a week or twice a month I'll do some high intensity stuff where I'm doing heavy loads, where you hit those max tissues to get those max unit recruitment. But if you can spend more time here, you are still getting muscle stimulus. You're allowing the cartilage, the joint capsule, all the other connective tissue to regenerate. And then you occasionally stimulate with these heavy loads. But the problem is when people lift heavy loads all the time, it's too much. It's right. It's annihilation, not stimulation. Save this. And I find that the tempo lifting highly just a lot of information can be drawn from that. So it's very much assessment, very enlightening, right? It's a good assessment process. You can get so much information by, can you control that bottom position? And then it helps me then start to patchwork, like, is that a hip ankle problem? Is it a spine problem? Is it a breathing problem? Because things start to tease out, and it just gives you things to work with.
Right.
And not that you have to know what to do with this. It's just like, oh, okay, well then let's just spend some time in this position, right? Let's spend some time in that position. Let's do some isometrics in that shortened position there, and let's see what happens. Perfect. Any other questions?
No, that's it.
In one of the lectures, you talked about having a pencil inside your hand.
Oh, yeah.
I still kind of don't understand that, even though I think you already explained that earlier.
Yeah. It's okay. So go back. That's Thomas, right? That's
Yes,
right, who was just talking. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Hey, Tom. Okay, so you have your wrist here, and if you like, just do this. Go into full flexion of your wrist, and then try to make a fist. Try to squeeze as hard as you can. Like, how would you assess your grip strength right now? Your grip in your right hand, is that strong? Do you feel like you have a really strong?
I believe so. No.
Okay, so now go into neutral and squeeze as hard as you can. I can already see your hand even closing more. Like, you got more of a. Go into full extension, and now maintain that wrist extension and try to squeeze, but don't. So what I saw is I saw a sissy grip here, and I saw the Hulk grip right there. So this whole thing is looking at your force production. Okay, this is you in mid-range. This is you in a shortened position. This is you in a lengthened position. You probably were a little bit stronger here than you were here. I can't even get my hand fully closed. So go at full wrist flexion. Show me what full wrist flexion looks like. Okay, now keep your wrist there. Don't let this come out. Now try to squeeze as hard as you can. Do it. What are you waiting for? You can't do it because you're actively insufficient, right? But I guarantee that if you practice enough, your body would get more and more comfortable with it. Especially, this would start to lengthen a little bit. You would start to build up some strength here, and you would get better in that position. But that's not real life. Real life is right here. And if you keep your hand neutral and you squeeze as hard as you can, you'll see that your body actually goes into a little bit of wrist extension as you go into finger flexion, because what it's doing is it's trying to keep the muscles here to do that, they run up the wrist and up the fingers. And so they're wrist flexors and finger flexors. If I stay here, I'm going into a shortened position. It's trying to lengthen. It's trying to maintain that mid-range. It's going, as I shorten up here at the fingers, it's lengthening here at the wrist so I can stay in that mid-range position. And that's why your most powerful grip is actually right here in this quasi extended position, not here in neutral, and definitely not here in flexed or extended, but a little bit that happy medium. As I shorten here at the fingers, it's lengthening here at the wrist. And all of your muscles that cross multiple joints, your gastric, your psoas, your abdominals, your rectus femoris, all these do that. They try to maintain this mid-range position to maximize strength output. So in this position here, if you put that pencil in there, I would be able to pull it out of your hand. Like, if you just grab my finger, I'd be able to pull it out, right? And back here, I'd be able to pull it out. But here, ain't going anywhere.
All right.
Sorry that I called you a sissy. Just in the shortened position. So, but I did give you, I called you the Hulk in the mid-range, so you're good. But Thomas, that's going back to John's question about the active and passive insufficiency. Here, you're actively insufficient, and then here, you're passively insufficient.
All right.
And then here, you're right in mid-range. That's where you're the strongest. Perfect. Perfect. Anything else? All right, that was great. It was great questions. It was great information, good practical application. And so I think we'll meet then one more time next week before the exam. And then next week we'll do the exam review. And that will be, we'll go back to our Wednesday 10 o'clock time slot.
Okay.
Perfect. I'm going to stop the recording.